And the parties are in a bit of a cooling off period after a contentious series of White House meetings. At one point, tempers flared between President Obama and the number 2 House Republican Eric Cantor. Witness to it all, leaders of both parties, including House Speaker John Boehner and his Democratic counterpart Nancy Pelosi. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and Minority Leader Mitch McConnell were also at the table. And so was my next guest today, Minority Whip Senator Jon Kyl of Arizona. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Christian.
You just heard the Budget Director Jack Lew saying absolutely a deal will be done and this country will not default. Are you there as well with that?
The country will not default. Whether or not there are savings achieved in the process remains open to question.
What kind of a deal do you think is going to be done? We've heard a resurrection of the grand bargain. Do you think that's possible?
Unless the president gets off of his absolute obsession with raising taxes, Republicans are not going to agree to do anything that will harm our economy. And job-killing taxes will harm our economy. So there will not be a default. But as to whether or not we can achieve savings in the process, again, depends on the president.
Let me quickly ask you first then, how will there not be a default? What do you believe will be the outcome? You're at that table.
Right. Republican leaders have made it clear that if all else fails, if our efforts to adopt legislation to cut the deficit, put a straitjacket on it and balance the budget, the so-called cut, cap, and balance, I think that passes the House. But if that doesn't pass the Senate, and if there is no other way to reach some kind of savings agreement, then at the end of the day, Republican leaders have made it clear that we will not be the ones who put the government into default.
So that would be the Mitch McConnell last-ditch effort?
Well, it's the McConnell-Reid effort, yes.
So that will be what you will agree to if all else fails?
That's what the Senate is proceeding with. Now, the House of Representatives has to make its decision about what it will do, but I'm simply answering your question. At the end of the day, I don't think there'll be a default.
All right. You talk about taxes, and obviously the Republicans have made that a line in the sand, no new taxes. And yet, poll after poll recently have basically said that the American people are not with you on that issue. The majority actually says that there should be a balanced approach, whether it's the Quinnipiac, even including not even a majority of Republicans say there should be no new taxes. So do you think that you're out of step with the American people on this?
Christian, I haven't seen the polls you're referring to. The last poll, in fact, I looked for polls that backed up the president, didn't find any. Well, the last poll, if I could, just 3 days ago, this is the Rasmussen poll. The question was, do you think that a tax hike should be included in any legislation to raise the debt ceiling? 55% say no, 34% say yes, and even independents, a majority of independents say no.
Okay, well, we could play polls all the time, but quite a lot of the established ones, like the Quinnipiac, says that 67% of Americans say debt reform should involve a balance of cuts and tax increases, especially for corporations and the wealthy. And indeed, as I said, not even a majority of Republicans say that there shouldn't be any tax increases. So, you have said that you don't want to do anything to jeopardize the country's standing and that there won't be a default. You said that the House may have a different attitude to this. Can we just play what Michelle Bachmann has been saying? And she is a leading member, as we all know, of the Republicans and is a presidential contender.
I'm no on raising the debt ceiling right now because I've been here long enough that I've seen a lot of smoke and mirrors in the time that I've been here, but I haven't been here long enough to forget who I serve or where I come from. People across America are saying the spending is what has to be addressed. It's too much. It's got to be limited.
Do you agree with her that it is all smoke and mirrors, the warnings from economists, from the Treasury Secretary, from the chairman of the Fed?
I don't agree with that, but I do agree with her that spending is the problem. Let me just show you this chart. The very end here, where the spending goes way up, demonstrates that it's spending that's the problem. And that's why Republicans are so insistent on addressing the cause of the problem, namely too much spending.
So you should be pleased then that your negotiating and your position has actually moved the president towards very significant proposals on spending cuts.
I wish I could say that's true. You notice that Jack Lew did not answer your question. The president did not answer Jake Tapper's question, the very first question at his news conference. What exactly would you do with regard to Medicare to effectuate savings? We've identified over $100 billion a year in savings just from Medicare, Medicaid, and unemployment compensation overpayments. This isn't hurting anyone who's entitled to it. These are payments that shouldn't be made. And yet all the president would say is he was willing to look at unspecified reforms.
You also heard what Jack Lew said. If there was part of a big deal, it would involve entitlements.
But we
presumably.
have no idea what he's talking about. That's the problem. Republicans are not willing to make a deal based upon some vague commitment that sometime in the future the president might be willing to look at something that he won't identify.
So right now, as both parties are in this, I guess, stalemate, critical impasse, you've also heard Senator McConnell say just this week, in fact, to a radio interviewer, that this politically could jeopardize the Republicans, that being sort of blamed, which they could be, for a bad economy could, quote, destroy the brand, and it wouldn't be good going into an election. Do you agree with that?
I don't really look at the politics of it. What we're looking at is what's good for the country. We know that raising taxes on a weak economy is not good for economic recovery and for job creation. And our first thought is, first, let's do no harm to economic growth and to putting Americans back to work again. That's why we're insistent that we should focus on the real problem, the spike in spending, and not this phony problem of taxes.
So, do you have a prediction as to how many in the House would be against at all cost raising the debt ceiling, for instance, as Michelle Bachmann said?
No, I don't. I simply was answering your question about what I thought would ultimately happen, and I don't think Republican leaders will allow the country to go into default.
Senator Kyl, thank you very much
Thank
indeed
you,
for
Christine.
joining us.